The Battle of Dorylaeum, fought on the sweltering plains of Anatolia on July 1st, 1097, was not merely a military engagement, it was the ultimate moment of baptism by fire for the First Crusade, determining within a single day whether the entire unprecedented enterprise would advance toward Jerusalem or be swallowed whole by the vast hostile interior of the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum. Its narrative is a foundational study in medieval military endurance, characterized by disastrous initial overconfidence, tactical flexibility under pressure, and the decisive, almost miraculous application of armored shock cavalry at the precise moment of annihilation. To comprehend the magnitude of this confrontation, one must first place the Crusader host within the colossal geopolitical and logistical context of their undertaking. The mass movement of the Crusades was born from the fevered rhetoric of Pope Urban II at Clermont, yet its reality was a fragile yet cumbersome convergence of disparate armies from across Western Europe. Normans, Provençals, Lotharingians, and French, united only by the cross, but divided by language, custom, and allegiance to their ambitious leaders. After navigating the political labyrinth of the Byzantine Empire and successfully capturing the Seljuk capital of Nicaea, the Crusaders were already profoundly weary. They had witnessed the sobering annihilation of the preceding People's Crusade under Peter the Hermit, an event which confirmed to Kilij Arslan, the young ambitious Seljuk Sultan, that the Frankish invaders were nothing more than a disorganized rabble susceptible to swift, mobile cavalry warfare. This easy triumph had bred a disastrous confidence in the Sultan. He assumed the main Crusader host, despite its size, possessed the same military ineptitude. This fatal underestimation of the Western Heavy Knight was the single greatest strategic error of the Seljuk campaign. The logistics of sustaining an army estimated to be between 60,000 and 100,000 souls, including a massive contingent of non-combatants, became an immediate and existential crisis upon entering the arid, mountainous, and scorching lands of Anatolia. The immense scale of the host rendered traditional foraging useless, as the sheer numbers instantly depleted any local resources. The relentless heat, the scarcity of reliable water sources, and the inevitable starvation created pervasive friction and distrust among the various European contingents. It was this unavoidable logistical imperative that forced the commanders to make the fateful decision to divide the great army into two primary columns. This split, intended to alleviate the pressure on foraging lines and allow parallel scouting, simultaneously halved the defensive power of each force, turning the march into a tactical gamble. The leading, faster-moving column acted as the reconnaissance vanguard and was placed under the command of Bohemond of Taranto, the politically shrewd and militarily brilliant Norman prince, alongside his nephew Tancred, Robert of Normandy, and Stephen of Blois. Bohemond's force was inherently the most vulnerable, carrying fewer heavy armored contingents, many of whom were reserved for protecting the main baggage train and the non-combatants in the rear. The second, slower column, trailing at least half a day's march behind, was led by the venerable Raymond IV of Toulouse, Godfrey of Bouillon, and Hugh of Vermandois. Kilij Arslan, observing this slow, fragmented progress, decided to strike the vanguard, believing he could repeat his proven strategy: isolation, ambush, and systematic destruction. His forces, bolstered by the allied Danish men Turks, numbered approximately 15 to 20,000 highly disciplined light cavalry, the epitome of the horse archer tradition. Their plan was surgically precise: to utilize the wide-open plains of Anatolia to maximize their mobility, deliver overwhelming firepower from a distance, and crucially avoid any direct static confrontation with the dense close-quarters combat strength of the heavily armored Western Knights. The morning of July 1st, 1097, broke over the sprawling Crusader encampment situated near the plain of Dorylaeum, a valley near the modern city of Eskişehir. At first light, the Seljuk assault began with terrifying, unexpected velocity. Horse archers, screaming war cries and riding with practiced precision, flooded over the crests of the surrounding low hills, instantly overwhelming the unprepared camp perimeter. Their relentless torrent of arrows was concentrated not just on the knights, but devastatingly upon the exposed foot soldiers, the camp servants, and the hundreds of non-combatants, who were immediately driven into a state of debilitating panic. The very earth seemed to erupt with the sound of thousands of arrows striking shield, mail, and flesh. The violence of the ambush immediately confirmed the Seljuk goal: to inflict chaos, fragment the enemy, and achieve psychological collapse before the Crusaders could muster their strength. Bohemond, a veteran of countless battles, instantly grasped the catastrophic gravity of the terrain and the tactics arrayed against them. The flat, featureless plain that had been chosen for ease of movement was now the perfect killing field for the mobile Turkish archers. His response was immediate and critical, a masterstroke of defensive tactical planning. He ordered his available knights and surviving infantry to form a tight circular defensive perimeter, a laager or carré, by dismounting the heavy Norman cavalry and linking their large kite or shield designs to create a continuous bristling wall of steel. The terrified non-combatants were rapidly pushed into the small, protected center. The Seljuk tactics were a sustained nightmare for the European forces. They galloped in tight, disciplined formations, unleashing dense volleys of armor-piercing arrows before executing the Parthian shot, firing over their shoulders while retreating just outside the range of the Crusaders' countercharge. The European knights, trained for the glorious, decisive shock of the Chevalier charge, found themselves maddeningly unable to close the distance. Sporadic, desperate charges were attempted, but the Turks simply dissolved, dispersed, and then reformed minutes later to renew their aerial bombardment. This constant, unremitting harassment, coupled with the searing heat, pervasive thirst, and the cumulative exhaustion of fighting from a fixed position, rapidly sapped the defenders' strength. The horses, which were less protected than their riders, fell in large numbers, further eliminating the Crusaders' most effective offensive weapon. By the middle of the morning, the vanguard was on the brink of complete annihilation. The constant roar of the battle was laced with the agonized screams of the wounded and the dying, and the ground surrounding the defensive square was rapidly becoming a grisly mound of casualties. The situation was beyond desperate. Seljuk warriors, growing increasingly bold, were moving onto the periphery of the perimeter, stripping the bodies of the fallen and taunting the living, further eroding the fragile morale of the besieged. Bohemond, along with leaders like Tancred and Robert, fought continuously, moving along the line to reinforce weak spots and prevent the defensive circle from breaking. But they knew that the siege warfare was simply unsustainable. Their only viable hope was the arrival of the main column, hours away, yet they had been sending desperate riders since the very first onset of the attack, their prayers for survival riding on the speed of those messengers. Miles away, the rear column under Godfrey and Raymond marched in relative ignorance, shielded from the immediate chaos by the terrain and distance, until the exhausted, bruised messengers finally delivered the shattering news. Their commanders, instantly recognizing that the destruction of Bohemond's force would expose the entire Crusader flank, made a command decision that defied standard marching orders. They abandoned their slow, steady progression. They ordered an immediate, accelerated, forced march, sending their fastest and most heavily armored cavalry, the very flower of French, Flemish, and Lotharingian nobility, galloping ahead. This sudden, decisive action, born of crisis and necessity, was the historical turning point that would define the success of the Crusade. The battle reached its bloody climax around midday, or perhaps slightly later. The first dust clouds, and soon after, the actual scouts of the relieving column appeared on the horizon. The unexpected sight of new, disciplined heavy cavalry slamming into their flanks struck the Seljuks at the very zenith of their confidence. Kilij Arslan, who had committed the majority of his forces to encircling and destroying the fixed vanguard, found his formations suddenly exposed to a new, fresh, and overwhelming threat. As Bohemond, sensing the relief, ordered a desperate, final, all-out countercharge from his exhausted defensive square, the forces of Godfrey and Raymond, having covered an incredible distance with astonishing speed, crashed into the Turkish flanks and rear. The Seljuks' carefully orchestrated tactical plan, which relied on the mobility of light horses against a static, fixed target, collapsed entirely when confronted by the shock of the double-pronged heavy armor charge. The relentless momentum and the sheer defensive capability of the Western armor proved completely overwhelming in the resultant close-quarters melee. The Turks learned their second catastrophic lesson. While their arrows could wound and harass, they could not withstand a coordinated charge by fully armed and disciplined knights. The European discipline and the physical weight of their charge smashed the less heavily protected Turkish lines. The Seljuk ranks, caught between the hammer of Bohemond's charge and the anvil of Godfrey's arrival, broke into a full-scale, panicked rout. Kilij Arslan the Void, his tactical vision shattered, realized the battle was lost and ordered a full retreat, abandoning his entire elaborate camp and the associated treasures to the victorious Christians. The Crusader knights, revitalized by victory and the smell of vengeance, pursued the fleeing Turkish forces until sheer exhaustion and the vastness of the plain halted their advance. The immediate aftermath was as providential as the timely arrival of the reinforcements. The abandoned Turkish camp was a staggering trove of provisions, including food, fresh water, tents, livestock, and coinage. This massive, unexpected influx of resources instantly solved the Crusader army's paralyzing logistical crisis. More importantly than the material gain, the psychological impact was transformative. For the Crusaders, Dorylaeum was viewed as a divine intervention, a miracle that confirmed the righteousness of their holy mission and proved definitively that their style of warfare, the disciplined defensive square followed by the overpowering armored charge, was superior to the mobile harassment tactics of the Turks. Although the Crusaders had suffered high casualties, estimated to be in the thousands, they had stared into the abyss of defeat and emerged victorious. For the Seljuk Sultan, the outcome necessitated a complete change in strategic philosophy. Kilij Arslan, having lost his capital and now his field army in a single devastating encounter, abandoned any further attempts at large-scale open-field combat. Instead, he retreated deep into the Anatolian interior, adopting a brutal and effective scorched earth policy. His retreating forces systematically destroyed all resources, crops, wells, and towns in the path of the advancing Crusader host, ensuring that the remainder of the march across Anatolia would be an agonizing, resource-depleted ordeal. While this extended the Crusader campaign and inflicted immense hardship, it also ensured the ultimate survival of the Seljuk Sultanate by denying the Crusaders a decisive, final battle. The Battle of Dorylaeum, therefore, was the decisive hinge upon which the fate of the First Crusade swung. It established the primacy of the military leadership of figures like Bohemond and Godfrey, instilled confidence in the weary soldiers, and, most critically, forced the primary Muslim opponent to adopt a defensive posture of attrition rather than offensive engagement. Had the leading column been destroyed, the entire army would have been exposed and likely defeated in detail. The victory, secured by the combination of Bohemond's unyielding discipline and the perfectly timed armored intervention of the rear column, prevented the failure of the crusade in the Anatolian plains and ensured the Christian armies would ultimately reach the walls of Jerusalem.